Okay, we're rolling. In chapter 2 of your book, The Fight Against Monsanto's Roundup, what did you mean by better active today than radioactive tomorrow?
Well, that's an old slogan from the anti-nuclear fight when we shut down the Shoreham nuclear power plant, prevented it from opening, and also in the Seabrook anti-nuclear fight in the late 70s and early 80s. That was our slogan because we didn't want to be radioactive. And we knew the nuclear power plants, even though they're supposed to be providing cheap energy and clean energy, it's neither cheap nor clean. And people were fighting on it. And so we were very active, not radioactive.
In chapter 21 of your book, The Fight Against Monsanto's Roundup, what did you mean by respecting the underground ecosystem and gut microbiome?
Well, the gut microbiome turns out to be crucial, and this is all new to me. I learned this from other people, like a lot of the things that I've written. And in our gut are really crucial bacteria, yeah, we knew that, but that are essential for preventing all sorts of diseases. And one of the things that Monsanto's Roundup does, it attacks the bacteria in the gut, which then can lead to all sorts of other ailments and diseases, including, it looks like, autism, and including, all that is not confirmed yet, but it looks, Stephanie Seneff has a material on that, and Jay Feldman from Beyond Pesticides was talking about that also in the book. So all these are absolutely crucial to think of what's in our gut as an ecosystem unto itself. And then we have the larger ecosystem, or you have the micro ones and then the micro ones. And somehow these many levels, it's very complicated mathematically or scientifically, because we could figure out some of the things within an ecosystem, but how does it relate to the next ecosystem or the larger one that's encompassing it, and the small one going up and down the levels? And then it gets really complicated really quickly. And we're just learning about it.
Is it a good idea to spray New York City or other cities to prevent against West Nile virus and other similar diseases?
Is it a good idea? That's wonderful. No, it's a horrible idea. It started with Mayor Giuliani, who's been in the press lately, again, same as he ever was. Went to Mayor Bloomberg, who's also in the press lately, running for president. Then it now goes to de Blasio, who is still doing the spraying, and he's supposed to be progressive compared to the others, and that's still happening. Now, we used to meet with Mayor de Blasio before he was mayor, when he was city council, and we would meet with all these people, and yet still they insist on spraying to kill mosquitoes that are said to be carrying West Nile virus. That's how I got involved in all this, how we formed the No Spray Coalition against pesticides, and which is www.nospray.org. And when they sprayed New York the first year in '99, we got together and we challenged. First, we didn't know what they were spraying. Then we found it to be malathion. They didn't know what they were spraying for. They didn't know it was West Nile even. They knew it was some mosquito, or they thought it was some mosquito-borne ailment. They originally thought that Saddam Hussein had sent this over as a bioterrorist attack. That was part of what my talk was about earlier today, was looking at the U.S. policy to other countries around the world with how it's conducted here, the spraying and how those intersect. And no, it's a horrible idea. So I'll tell the story about it. I was out in Prospect Park on September 9th, I believe, 1999. And I'm out there, and all of a sudden, and millions of people are out there, great summer day, or actually autumn day, but it was still summer. And there were loads of little kids out there, older people walking their dogs. It was just packed. And then I heard something, I looked up, and there come the helicopters right over the tree line. And I think it was 2 helicopters, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was one. My remembering of all this stuff is like everything happened really fast. And it comes over and it starts spraying everybody and everything in the park, drowning or drenching everybody. So I realized what it was because I had seen some announcement of that barely on TV like a few days before. And I ran around to try and get the kids and everybody, but mostly the kids, out of the park because the pesticides are just so harmful to children. It's harmful to adults too, but especially to children who are not developed yet, and it could impact them for the rest of their lives. And so we ran, get in. There were police cars there, and the police did nothing. They didn't make any announcement. They didn't warn anybody at that time. It was just, they're just sitting there. And so we ran and tried to get out of the park. And then we eventually filed a lawsuit another few months later against the city with the New York Environmental Law and Justice Project. Joel Kupferman was our lawyer's name. Great person. We went to Stony Brook University together. And we put together this lawsuit that challenged the spraying over water, the spraying of people, just all different aspects of it, where the chemicals were stored. We had a toxicologist, Dr. Robert Simon, who took samples all over the city. In the course of this whole thing, we took samples from the mayor's house at Gracie Mansion. We snuck over the fence and put them in sterile containers. It's just soil samples. And it turned out that almost a year later, the samples still had residues of pesticides in them, even though that was supposed to be gone out of the environment, they said, pretty immediately. The stuff breaks down, they said. Under ideal conditions, they break down pretty quickly, but it turns out there are never ideal conditions. It's always rainy a little bit, or it's sunny. They need exact heavy doses of ultraviolet sunlight to break down. Where you're going to get that in Prospect Park under the trees, and there was all sorts of issues. The chemicals were stored out here on Long Island, out in Cutchogue, I think it was, and so they were kept. We actually had people coming out and tracking them. We thought like we were becoming private eyes in a way, and we saw that they were being stored in these sheds that were being hit by the sun before they were done, and they got really hot in the canisters, which causes the malathion, which is what it was, to break down into isomalathion and meloxin, which are 10 times, 20 times more dangerous than even the malathion, which is bad enough. There was a component in the malathion called piperonyl butoxide, which is also now added to what they replaced the malathion with, which is pyrethroids, which are also dangerous, but in a different way. And this is that alone is a cancer-causing agent, but it prevents the body from breaking down the poison in the body so that it poisons the insect. But it also poisons people, and it poisons animals and fish. And you're not allowed to spray, even on the label it says you're not allowed to spray over or near water or public waterways, because it kills everything in there. So over the year, and 2 years, and then 3 years, and then 4 years that the lawsuit was going on, the courts pulled it apart piece by piece, even though we had people testifying that they were sprayed in the face, that they were in the hospital. The city made no record of people who were poisoned by the pesticide. No record of that by them, so we set up our own hotline so people could call. And we're all a nothing group. We're just a few people who, who were active and knew each other on various issues. And suddenly just everything was going wrong with this, whether the courts were pulling apart the court case. And eventually the last judge just threw everything out, except he said that he'll leave it open, the question about whether or not it was sprayed over or near water, because that was in federal law under the Clean Water Act, which passed surprisingly under Richard Nixon. Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Environmental Protection Agency. There are a whole bunch of environmental things. I talk about a lot about that in the book, about how it is that Richard Nixon, who everybody that I knew hated, like legitimate, including me, but yet all these environmental laws were passed for possibly the wrong reasons under his presidency. And they continue today. And now they're being torn apart today, even that. So then it went up and down the courts, back and forth. It took 7 years. Finally, a federal judge took that little window that we were left open. Didn't matter that people were sprayed in the face. Didn't matter that all these animals died. That we talked to animal rehabilitators, and Bob Zink out in Staten Island had kept detailed logs of every animal that was brought to him after the spraying, and he gave them to us, and we went through them one by one, and we went through all the phone calls that we got. The city's hotline was being answered out in Pennsylvania somewhere with non-union workers, and they just farmed it out, who knew nothing at all. They were just like anybody, just poor people who needed a job, so they get the job. They don't know what they're talking about. They're not trained in anything, and they didn't have any idea what a pesticide was, and you're only supposed to call them if you think you had West Nile, and then they send you somewhere else. They couldn't give you advice on that either. So it went up to one judge, federal judge, Judge Daniels, who ruled that we were right. Finally, in 2006, we got the first ruling. Up until then, the city refused to negotiate with us. We met with them thousands of times. I mean, it was thousands is an exaggeration, but I'd say hundreds of times we met with someone or else someone else in the city. It just went on and on, meeting all these people. It didn't matter. They didn't care. They didn't want to listen to us. And then we went to the next level up. We got all these doctors involved who opposed the spraying. It was quite remarkable. Every single one said that that the spraying was horrible, especially for children and elderly people too. And if you're immune compromised, and if you have other diseases, which is pretty much, I'd say, 3/4 of the people in New York, and it didn't matter. Nobody cared about that. In the courts, nobody in the official capacity cared about it. A lot of other people cared about it in the street and in their houses and in where they were being sprayed. So Judge Daniel ruled that indeed it was sprayed over the water, and that's illegal, and that it was sprayed from a point source. This is how technical, how the Clean Water Act runs, and the city opposed that, and they lost, and we won. And as soon as we won that, all of a sudden, oh, let's negotiate. Yes, maybe you're right. You know, they could have saved all those lives. Literally, people was getting sick all over the place from the spraying. Not as some people got very sick from West Nile. The numbers, though, comparatively were very low, like 7 people in the whole New York area the first year, 4 in New York City. And from the spraying, people, I'd say hundreds of people, maybe more, were sickened by the spray the first 2 years. And it was just awful. And so then the city wants to negotiate with us. So we said, all right. And our tactic in negotiating was not your normal way, because we had met with some of the major environmental groups to come and support us. NRDC, I'll name them. Environmental Defense Fund was the other big one. 2 giant nonprofit corporate environmental groups that we all get fundraising letters from. They didn't want to help us one bit early on. They just said, no, we're not getting involved in that. Why? I don't know. They couldn't put the issues together and didn't want to, and they were afraid that we were going to be too radical and they couldn't control what we were saying. Not that we said anything that outrageous, but yeah, it was pretty radical, saying they shouldn't be spraying pesticides at all. And that was a debate. Well, what about a little bit? What about here? What about